Survivor Specialist John and McKenna are back to rewind this episode of 48 and talk about what this episode reminded us of, but in the past. John, how did you like this episode?
This episode was so interesting to me, McKenna, because about halfway through the episode, or about half an hour into the episode, I was texting Phil, and it's like, we haven't even seen Mitch and Star on screen yet. What is going on here? And it was literally the commercial break right until we got the scene with Mitch and Star in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, never mind. I rescind my comment. I should be more patient. Whatever. It's fine. But it made me realize this is a very different type of storytelling that we haven't had in Survivor very frequently. And where it's
crash.
Yeah, it's a crash, right? But because it's so focused on just the people within the alliance, and it's not showing, the people on the bottom as much and their struggle with it. Yeah. And because the narrative was so about it, it was almost structured and we've been saying this a lot in the last couple of seasons. It was structured more as scripted television than it was reality TV. And it's great that we have this perspective going on to Survivor now where we can get this type of storytelling. But it was so different. And then as it continued escalating and as we got closer to the end, it became very apparent what was happening. And we get into this decision between, is it going to be Mitch? Is it going to be David? What's going on? Ultimately, I came out of this episode really enjoying this episode of Survivor. How about you? How did you feel about it?
Interesting you say that. I felt it was a little boring. And then it just okay, interesting boot. David goes home, and who's in the majority, and it's not one of the people on the bottom. But at the same time, for 45 minutes, we just heard the same thing over and over of should we get out David? Should we get out David? Maybe it's time for David. Oh, wait, we have to lie to David and say, we're going for Camilla. We're going for Camilla. Yes, it's Camilla. Camilla. And it's just I felt like I was hearing the same conversations for 45 minutes, except for the 2 seconds of Mitch and Star.
I think that's a fair critique of the episode. I think the thing that made it more compelling for me is that it's really framed around Joe and just to some extent Eva as well as the people in the middle. Mm-hmm. And the people who are really ultimately making this decision, because in the end, they are kind of the power holders in this episode. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I think it makes sense that we're hearing the same conversation over and over again. And we're I think the conversation goes beyond just, should we get rid of David? And it more boils down to, David's paranoia saying, hey, I think Camilla and Cheyenne and Kyle have something going on here. And Kyle pushing back on that, being like, David and Mary, they're trying to break us up. They're doing this, right? And I think that's what was so interesting about it, because yes, we saw it repeated over and over again, but it almost puts us in the place of Joe and Eva in this situation where it's okay, we see both sides. We know both sides are correct here. Which one's the one that makes more sense to go with?
Spoiler alert. We are watching episode 10 of Guatemala, Eating and Sleeping with the Enemy, over on the Patreon. And I'll mention this more in detail over there, but it felt like that episode felt more satisfying than this one did in terms of which side do you take? Do you go with someone who's more paranoid? Do you turn on them? What's going on here? It felt like that episode took the right approach, and I was in it more than this one.
Interesting. I really look forward to dissecting that on the Patreon, because I think there might be some things that contribute to it. But this just felt refreshing, because we've been complaining about the last couple of weeks about these last couple of episodes being oh, okay, the boring thing's going to happen. And we finally get an exciting thing.
You need to have happen is the boring things. But also, I do think this was, I think ultimately the boot was better than the episode.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm glad that they went with David, because then it justifies the beginning half of the episode. If they didn't go with David, I would have been pissed.
I don't think they edited it this way if David's sticking around.
I know, but still, I'm this better be David.
Yeah, I understand that, and especially like I know Phil was saying it on Digging Deeper that it didn't really make sense for Mitch to be the person going because Mitch wasn't getting the only content Mitch really got in this week's episode was teaching Star how to swim, and that seems really weird to be the included moment in one's boot episode.
Yeah.
Also, he also claimed that because Mitch was hosting a watch party, that Mitch was probably not going home. And I don't know if I stick with that theory, Phil. I get where you're coming from with that, but
Yeah.
ultimately, I did think that this episode was a step up from the previous couple, and I'm still just kind of at a point where last week we were kind of feeling, hey, this like Mary David thing kind of came out of nowhere. We're not really seeing it at all, and David's exit press kind of enlightened us a little bit as to why, because it's kind of just Mary kind of just forced her way into that relationship. But
A la
we were
Sugar
kind of
and Colby? And David just
no, not
let
that
it
much.
happen?
No. More that like Mary just like kind of inserted herself in a strategic role to the point where she like hung around a lot, and David had to be like, yeah, I guess we're using Mary as our sixth in this alliance, according to David in his exit press. But the interesting thing about it is like we were condemning the editors last week for not showing us enough, and this week I feel like I kind of want to praise them again just for trying something different, because we're 48 seasons into this show. We have seen almost every permutation of how to show an alliance breaking down, how to show this type of paranoia growing, and it felt a little fresh, and it felt like something new, despite the fact that yes, some people might argue it was boring and that it was the same conversation over and over again. And maybe when we compare it to an episode like an episode of Guatemala, which is half the time, like maybe that's why it felt more boring, because it was spread out more. I don't know. I just felt like it was refreshing. I was a little frustrated with how it was going. Also, mostly just because like Mitch and Star are fantastic characters and I want to see more of them.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I thought this was a pretty good episode of Survivor.
Yeah, I mean, most Survivor is good Survivor. Not saying it for this season. Just I don't know. Anywho, let's get into the actual episode at hand here. Diving into our Outwit moment of this week, and we are talking advantage choices. So Eva goes on her little journey situation at night, and she has an extra vote. Great. Then she can risk this extra vote to go for a safety without power. She can then risk the safety without power to go for a full-on idol. So she has options of advantages in front of her. What do we want to do here? So I want to go over to Debbie on her exile Cochrane boat, where she is presented with 3 options of advantages. Just kind of like how Eva is here. She just didn't have to risk anything for them. She just had her option of what to do and how do I do it, and maybe do I take a fake idol making kit to fake someone out? I don't know.
It's so interesting. And before we dive into Debbie and Game Changer, I just have a question, McKenna. How did you feel about Eva's choice here? Like, and how she approached this? Because obviously we've seen the internet is so divided on this. I don't think I've ever seen the internet so divided on how to approach an advantage.
Man,
because we have
hope we're on the opposite sides here.
I think we are, because I think my opinion is the one that like no one is sharing. But we've seen like Will and Blake and Carolyn, who was on the recap on Wednesday, all kind of say, yeah, it makes sense for Eva to go for the safety without power. Phil is saying, just take the extra vote. You don't need, like, it's a thing. You have it. Like, safety without power is only good if you're in the minority. You're in the majority. If there is a splintering, like, this is enough to get you through. So where do you land on it?
Eva is perfect. Did everything correctly.
Interesting. Okay.
I would
Why?
not. I think. Well, all right. Yes, she is in the majority, but the majority can easily flip to the minority at any point, and then that extra vote gives you nothing. I feel like the extra vote is not useless, but if you're trying to make a move sometimes, like an extra vote can do like it doesn't really do you much in certain situations. But a guarantee for safety without power, and you have an idol, then say you and Joe safe. You're good.
Mhm.
Then, if you wanted to risk for the other idol, I feel like she already has one. You're good on that front because I think having two idols, you can either go the route of like James get voted out with them, or you can be like tie and everybody's like hunting you down for idols or thinks you have an idol or I feel like he didn't really play an idol correctly except for the Suri vote, if that counts.
Kind of
So,
counts.
so like I feel she did it correctly because you have the extra vote, you're playing with house money when you gamble for the safety without power. And I know that's kind of where you're going to go. You definitely go for the idol, but I like the odds of the 50-50 rather than the 1 in 3.
So I understand that thought process, and I kind of land on the side of Phil when it comes to the safety without power, where safety without power is kind of the most dangerous advantage you can have in this position. Because yes, it guarantees your own safety, but because we're looking at a game that has been so built on trust and alliances, essentially, that it really does her using it either burns both of her advantages in one tribal council to protect Joe, or kind of leaves Joe out to dry if she uses it at final 7.
I
Now,
mean,
great.
unless you can meet someone from
Yeah, that's true.
council to give you the numbers, like what if she
No, but
gets
it says that you have to use it on yourself.
that one does? Okay.
Yeah. The extra vote, I think, does have power in the fact that it makes it so you need one less person to make a move. I do think there is value in that.
In smaller numbers, I think there's value to the extra vote. She would just have to make sure she's there for smaller numbers. Not saying that she's going out anytime soon, but I feel like the extra vote is either good if for like extra insurance on a vote if you're not sure of a member sticking to the plan, or if you're down to 5 and you or 6 and you have 3 votes against someone else's 3 and now you're like, all right, great, I have an extra vote, we can lock this in.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But I think the reason why, and you actually said exactly why I think the
I
idol
know.
is the correct
I
approach.
knew exactly where you were thinking with this.
And to be fair, Carolyn didn't agree with going for the idol on Wednesday, but she provided me the argument for it. You're on Survivor, just do it. Like, it's your only time on Survivor. You are, like you said, you're playing with house money. You already have this extra vote, and it's already more than you already had, which could be an argument to stop at the extra vote. However, the difference of having an idol that is good till 5, as opposed to safety without power that's good till 7, or an extra vote that's good till 6, is so big when you already have a public idol. And most of it just comes down to the fact that, first off, idols can be played on anyone, so there's a lot more options you have with it, which is, again, why it's the last one, right? Why it's the, hey, you have a 1 in 3 chance of getting this. And now I know some people might say it's a 1 in 6 chance. She had already gotten the safety without power before she had the option of doing it, so it's still a 1 in 3 chance.
Why would it be 1 in 6?
Math. It's 1 in 6 from the extra vote. Because you multiply, right? But because she already had the safety without power, it's still 1 in 3.
Got it.
But the ability to play that idol, like the idol that everyone knows about because Star knows about it, and still have an idol, is so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was just that aspect of it, and it wasn't something that was discussed at all, obviously. And I know I'm on the outs when it comes to this thought process.
No, I think it's
Being
fine.
it, but
I think that thought process is fine, and I don't, like, disagree with it because, it like, she's not risking her own personal vote.
yes,
She's just
that's the
risking
big thing. If this was a
everyone.
personal vote, no way.
Yeah.
But it's just like, here's this thing that you didn't have before. Do you want to risk it a little more?
Yeah, I just feel like this is what I like about this journey and what I didn't like about Yahtzee. I
Mhm.
could press my luck till when I didn't want to. So,
Yes.
like, I'm pressing my luck for the safety without power. I'm done. I don't want to press my luck anymore. So, like, I did like that option to, like, just not.
Yeah. Well, and let's speak of options then. So remind me, what were the options that Debbie could choose from on an exile island?
So, first one is the most absurd, right? It's the idol making kit. And
Yeah.
I I think that is definitely the worst option, but, like, is there a merit to the idol or the fake immunity idol kit?
Probably not. I think that was just production wanting to get fake idols made, right?
Mhm. I mean, yeah, that's that's definitely a possibility. Then what was it? It was also,
Was that challenge advantage, correct?
yes, challenge advantage and the extra vote.
Mhm.
So,
So as an
again,
interesting,
another extra vote.
this was right after the tribe swap too, right?
Yes.
And the
Wait,
tribe swap was what
was
led
it?
to her going to exile.
Was it? Gosh, we should have done our research before this, man.
I'm pretty positive because
Yes.
this is yeah right.
Second
It's
second tribe swap, second tribe
yeah,
swap.
second tribe swap led her to go to exile. She
I
beats
was like, I
Cochrane.
didn't think it was in 3 tribes, but
No,
it was
yeah.
there. They had so many swaps.
So there are merits to a challenge advantage there. Obviously, it's the camaraderie and everything. It's the playing for the team aspect. But you're already swapped again. It's
Mhm.
okay. Extra vote you could also say is kind of for your new tribe and stuff like that to keep it
Especially
strong.
when you had that Malcolm tribal council. You never know, what she could play it off like, what if we go
Yeah,
to tribal with the other tribe and they wanna get rid of, I don't know, if they
yeah.
wanna pull another twist like that again.
I think the interesting thing with Debbie's choice is one of them is so much more powerful. And again, it's an extra vote, right? We get into an extra vote again, just like we did with Eva. And it's so fascinating because that's the far and away the one that is more powerful, right? Like, yes, a
Mhm.
challenge advantage could get you immunity, but it's not guaranteed immunity.
Right.
So an extra vote is the one that holds the most inherent power of these options, unless you think that you can really leverage a fake idol. But I
It's
mean,
like
there,
small, medium, large. Like, it's like you have your options.
yeah. And the thing is like is a fake idol even that good? Because like, how many times does it actually save someone? We've talked about it previously, right? Like, it doesn't save people
Yeah,
that often. In fact,
not
it
often.
usually paints a target on someone.
Yeah.
So the extra vote was a clear choice for Debbie. Some might argue that she's the biggest advantage she's getting is just being able to talk with a survivor winner out there on that boat, anyways, right?
Mhm.
But
I mean, yeah, that's, like, the real advantage here is
yeah,
Cochrane.
but it's so fascinating to see this choice so early in the game
Yeah.
because because it is one where, and again, this is kind of when survive. It might seem weird, but remember, seasons of Warrior 4 still
Alright,
really
season 50, could we have a vote on who the celebrity guest is at Exile
there we go.
Island?
Yeah,
I think that's the next poll we need to put
yeah.
in.
I think one of the things we kind of forget with Game Changers being season 34 and this being an extra votes are pretty new in Survivor at that point,
Yeah. Yeah, at
right?
30.
Yeah, because the first extra vote was in 30. We had
Mhm.
the seal vote in 31, but like it had only been around for a couple seasons, and they are pretty powerful if you can leverage it, especially in a returning season with constant changings
Mhm.
of like numbers and everything, right? When you're in this, again, this is going into a second tribe swap. you're making so many connections that having an extra vote is literally like having an extra person for a vote later on.
Right. And then we also have Davy with his idol and doing idol extensions.
Mm-hmm. This is more similar to, I think, what Eva had to do, but where you're wagering something that you've gained already,
Right.
but how you decide to do that, because Davy, again, in David versus Goliath, who, for those who don't remember, he was looking for the idol. He found a clue. It told him to like walk down to the other side of the beach. Very similar to what Eva's clue said.
Yep.
And he was given an idol that was good for just the next tribal council. And he had the option. There were 2 boxes to choose from. He could twice. There were 2 options, so you could extend it up to 2 times.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about this type of thing before. We literally talked about it recently when we were talking about Chris Noble and him having an idol that you could also extend. And this is something more that we see on Ghost Island. There were a lot more choices in Ghost Island because of the way Ghost Island worked.
Yeah.
But this is us seeing it in the game itself. And again, very similar to Eva, where it's like, you have this thing. You can keep it for this one tribal council, or you can risk it to hopefully extend it. Now, it wasn't as drastic as Chris Noble, where Chris lost his vote.
Yeah.
If he missed, Dave would just lose the idol.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also a very fascinating scene, because this is Davey like standing there pondering what to do, and he's looking at the fire to see if it goes left or right, and it's going like perfectly straight still. And he takes it as a sign from God not to do anything. So it's a fascinating character moment for Davey, and I think it's very similar to what we get with Eva, where Eva, we didn't see a lot of contemplation from Eva as to whether or not she was going to risk this extra vote. It just kind of happened right away.
I think she definitely was just in the mindset of like, I feel like a safety without power is more useful to me. I'm going to go for that. Like, it was very just direct of like, I don't really need to think about this. I've weighed my options and, here it is. Or maybe it was just cut out. And then I feel like the real hemming and hawing is from safety without power to idol. That's really where you like decide. With Davey having it be the same advantage, just an extra tribal council more, it's like a little back and forth, because it's like, do I do it? Do I not? Do I do it? Do I not? It's just one more tribal council. It's the same, or I can have this idol for sure. Like, I would have a tougher time with pressing my luck in Davey's situation than I would in Eva's situation.
I agree. And especially with how powerful an idol is, right? And I think that's why this escalation is so much more interesting than just the lengthening. And I know we've talked many times about how the lengthening of an idol's lifespan is a really clever way to change things. Like we talked about it last season with the Beware advantages and how they could escalate them to extend them. It's interesting that we went away from that right away and we went to this escalating advantages instead. It feels like, and it's been a while. When was the last time we saw safety without power?
Winners at War?
Right? So it's the only time we've seen it before. Has it been mentioned since then? I don't remember some of these new era seasons as well as I should.
Well, also we've like vowed to not talk about them.
It's true, which means we don't research them at first. But it is one of those things where it's like, this is an advantage that, like, again, has its pros, has its cons. You even look at it, how it's used in Winners at War. It's almost like, yes, Jeremy saves himself, but condemns himself at the same time because he loses a member of his own alliance.
Yeah. Next, we are heading into Outplay, and we are talking Crocodile Rock. That is the name of the challenge that they had this season. And surprisingly, it has only been played 4 times in US Survivor. If you watched Australian Survivor, we just saw it over on Australian Survivor, Brains versus Brawn 2, but we will be talking about the instances that we see it in Ghost Island and IOI. Now, what's interesting about Crocodile Rock is in the little trivia facts on the website, it has only been put into seasons that have the double tribal council twist.
Mhm.
And 2 of the 4 seasons were for the double tribal. So let's get into that. First one is Ghost Island. Chelsea and Dom win it for their respective sides. It's the same thing that we had with the Crank. Chelsea won for her team, Dom won for his team, and I think this is a great challenge. I think it's a fun endurance challenge because all of a sudden you could be rock solid and then whoop, gone.
Well, we saw it happen with David, right? Like David looked like there was no way he was going to lose this. Joe was getting closer and closer to that the terminus there, and then all of a sudden David overreacts to his ball slipping, and it forces him to fall off of his platform. The interesting thing is that everyone was on a platform in this version of the challenge, because when we look at Ghost Island, that's not the case.
They're just in a little square. So like they're adjusted for height with the platform, that like they don't start at a base platform level and then the platform height is adjusted. It's like, no, the floor is your platform and you have to stand in this little square.
For taller people.
For the taller people, or you have a platform for the shorter people.
This is always an interesting challenge to me because I don't know how hard it is. It looks hard, in all honesty. Like holding that like curl position.
It's one of those, I think, deceiving challenges where it's like you could have a strategy for it. Like with what I thought was interesting that I didn't remember seeing in the other versions is like that little T that they had directly at the back of the pole that you were holding onto. So you had the grip pole and then there was like a T running back. And
I wasn't sure what that was for.
I think it might have been something for the locking mechanism, or so you didn't go too close to it or whatever. But I think I would have looked at that where it is on my body and then been like, all right, so if it goes down from there, I need to bring it back up instead of like looking up and craning my neck up at the ball. But I don't know how possible that is because, again, like so many it happened to so many where you just like slip for 1 second or move your hand in the inch down and then you can't recover.
And it's such an interesting structure too, because I mean, there's the rope that's kind of going down. I wasn't sure. It probably was for the locking mechanism. It's probably the reason. Maybe not. Maybe the locking mechanism is just like the pressure you apply. It's possible it's like a counter tension to like pull it the other way to make it a little harder. That wouldn't surprise me in modern day Survivor. But the interesting thing about this is this structure moves a lot. Did you notice that in this challenge?
Moves back and like the bar that you're holding onto can move this way and it can move this way.
For
Sorry, audio viewers. Left and right, up and down.
Back and forth. All of the directions. Omnidirectional.
Essentially, because it's almost like a screw was loose or something. But I saw with Joe's, because we were getting so many close-ups on Joe, like he was shifting around side to side and not up and down where like the ball would drop out of. It was just like, oh, shifting a little when I think it's just an interesting, like it's fickle.
It is. And when this premiered in Ghost Island, it's interesting because it's a new challenge at that point, right? Like never been done before. We get to see it fresh, which is always exciting when we see something like fresh and new. But it's also in this split tribal situation where you don't even know who you can count on in your grouping to kind of like push it over the edge. Yes, of course, this was also a split tribal where both tribes went to tribal council and they both voted someone out. So it was really important to win that individual immunity. And again, this was an instance where the winning tribe got to, see who was already voted out beforehand.
Yeah, because it was Jenna. Immediately, Jeff was just like, "Go sit on the jury."
Yeah, exactly. So that it could, what is the word I'm looking for? It could influence that second group and how they vote, knowing who's been voted out. But it's so, it's just so weird because how do you approach a new challenge on Survivor like that? And it was impressive seeing these people in Ghost Island do it.
Yeah, I mean, we've had many a buoy balance or buoy like kind of up in the air challenge. But this one having the set of jaws is, very interesting instead of like that rolling pin situation where they have to balance it on the that wooden frame. We also see it in Island of the Idols, and this is the breakfast sit out Lauren Island of the Idols task where she has to bet on people to win the immunity. And she bet on Elizabeth and Nora. And Nora winds up getting the win here. But there's that added Island of the Idols element to this challenge where it is the sit out challenge. So we don't know how these people would do it and win.
Yeah. And the interesting thing, this is how this can also connect to 48 is we get this sequence of Lauren kind of like incepting the idea of breakfast into all the castaways. She knows that breakfast is going to be offered at this challenge. So she just talks up breakfast foods a lot before the challenge. The people she bet on are the people she knew would compete anyways. She knew that Nora and Elizabeth would feel the need to compete. And in fact, the only people who compete in this challenge are Nora, Elizabeth, and Karishma, who is like clearly on the bottom at this point too. So Lauren did her job, making sure everyone sat out. The interesting thing about that instance, though, with this challenge, again, this is the second time we've seen this challenge. It's the only time we've seen it in the individual portion. People aren't used to it. This is also one that you're not really.
Ghost was individual. It was just.
Well, yes, but like not with like the split tribal and
okay,
stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is like this is a challenge that you've only seen once before, and it was 3 seasons prior to this. So you couldn't expect this challenge to come up again like this. You weren't. This isn't exactly the type of challenge you're practicing, nor could you be unless you knew exactly how that tension worked on that ball and everything, right?
I'm sure some handy person could figure it out.
Do you think Hunter from 46 had this one built in his backyard too?
Yeah, 100%. If we go and walk in his backyard, Crocodile Rock is there.
Okay, but it's this one's again very interesting because of the way that Lauren is incentivized to sit out of this challenge. Because she's not betting on herself; she's betting on 2 other people.
Yeah, which I think she could bet on herself, and she was like, "Oh, that's good."
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like this challenge. I think it's a good challenge because it does provide that moment. It does give us more that endurance, but also, the shock of, oh my gosh, they just dropped. Because we get that in certain situations where like a totem falls off the pole or the ball falls off the pole where it's like, oh, but it's not the same as this one. This one, it can happen like in a flash and then they can save it or they're out.
I think like it's really good to compare this to kind of the other endurance challenges we've seen this season, right? Like with Get a Grip and the what's that thing? The crank.
The crank, yeah.
With those challenges, those one like the crank is one where like it follows. They save it. It's very similar to this one, but Get a Grip is one where we don't see people falling off of Get a Grip unless it's Andrea deciding to bail.
Michelle Fitzgerald too also did it.
Oh, that's right, and Winners at War, but it's one where the last person's usually like, "Okay, I'm out," and they let themselves out. Whereas this one has that okay, we get the wide angle shot. Who's going to fall? And it's the person you don't think it is. It is an exciting challenge because of that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. Outlast, the reason why we have the lovely ladies on our thumbnail and why we're watching Guatemala over on the Patreon. So make sure you watch Guatemala episode 10. Everything is eating and sleeping with the enemy. Go watch that so you can listen to us tomorrow. We're talking turning on an alliance. So we have the strong six here that they are going to take it to the six and then, deal with it later. But we see David go home here. Joe and Eva are in the middle trying to decide, what do we do? Do we stick with the six? Do we vote out Camilla? Like, do we vote out David? Where are we feeling the most comfortable?
Yeah, it's been that story of the season so far, right? Like, it's why this episode is edited so differently and why it's so focused on this alliance itself. And it was so interesting going back and looking at alliances, McKenna, and seeing who's turned on them, because like we have examples of it, right? Like we have Australian Outback when they decide to get rid of Jerry before getting rid of everyone from the other tribe and everything. But a lot of those instances tend to be tribal. They tend to be
like, all right, we're Toggy, we're getting rid of Pagong, and then have to turn on ourselves. So it's like, or like All Stars, where Rob and Amber decide between Big Tom and Alicia versus Rupert and Jenna.
Yeah, exactly, right?
We're at the pointy end of the stick now. Like,
yeah, it happens really late in the season, typically. And I mean, we've talked to death about Jerry being voted out, so we couldn't talk about that. But I think it's really interesting because I think the first example that you want to talk about here, McKenna, is fascinating because it's a tribe that, or an alliance that wanted to do something and then couldn't, and how it affected the season later.
Yeah, so I want to talk I2-4 going into fans versus favorites. And the man, the myth, the legend, Ozzy. They had a plan pre-merge. If they lost, go for Ozzy. Ozzy's out. But then the whole mutiny happened, and then the merge and all that. And Ozzy was a number for Yul, and Yul could not get anyone else on side, and he needed that number in Ozzy and didn't really want to take Ozzy to the end. But one, he won himself all the way there. And two, Yul had no other option.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing. And I think that's why there's this conversation about, this is why I think this episode really gives us such great conversation on so many podcasts this week, because like there's a lot of people who are like, was this the right decision? Right? I mean, it was literally the conversation that Phil and Blake put the entire digging deeper around this week, right? Like, was this the right decision? Was David, because David was right. Like, Kyle and Camilla do have something going on. Cheyenne, I guess, is kind of in there, but he's probably more in there now. But was it the right move? Because these people were working together. Like they were preaching loyalty and honor and these things to get to the end. And it again, I think this just kind of shows like David's short-sightedness from not being a longtime fan. And I think Blake mentioned this in Digging Deeper too. But when you are preaching these things, it doesn't work, because there is eventually someone in there who's like, I can't sit near the end with you.
Yeah.
Because you're too much of a threat. And that's exactly what Ozzy is when it comes to Cook Islands, right? And Ozzy wins out. He wins what, the last 4?
Yeah. He wins.
Communities?
They were gonna try
5 of the last 6.
Yeah, they were gonna try and get rid of him like at the I2-4. And then they were like, no, Ozzy, I'm Ozzy, I'm just gonna win everything. So Yul never really had the opportunity to anymore, but also early merge, he didn't make the push either of like, okay, I want to get rid of Ozzy because I had the plan. He like restructured and reordered his gameplay. So then that leads us into fans versus favorites, where we have Amanda, kind of like the Mary in this situation, she's left out. David is getting blindsided like Ozzy, and then the rest of the tribe are Parv, Suri, what Joe and Eva are Parv and Suri, and whoever else votes for Ozzy. It's like the rest of the tribe who voted for David, where Ozzy was fully in their alliance. It was like the couples alliance plus Suri, and then Ozzy was no more because they were like, if we don't strike while the iron's hot and someone else has immunity, he's going to keep going just like he did the last time.
And I think this is a really interesting example because when people think of alliances on Micronesia, they don't think about this couples plus Suri alliance. They think about the Black Widow Brigade, which, granted, 3 of the people in that other alliance are in the Black Widow Brigade, so that makes sense. And the interesting thing here is that the Black Widow Brigade was forming at this point, right? Like, we were almost there at this point. Like, this solidified it completely with Amanda being able to forgive the instant betrayal and be like, no, it's fine. We're working together. Even though we kind of saw the Black Widow Brigade kind of like pick each other off moving on from here. But it's
interesting what Mary does in the Amanda situation. Does she say, oops, that good move, guys? Or is she then going to be like, all right, Star, Mitch,
Well, that's what we saw in the preview for next week, right? Like, we saw some conversation of Mary going to the people who are presumably on the bottom and trying to unite them. So, yeah, I agree. It will be very interesting to see how she approaches the situation and what she does. But the fascinating thing with this is, my question for you out of this is, do you think this vote out here is the type that's going to give us the alliance that's going to go run the rest of this game now? Because I think it's fairly safe to say that the couples plus Suri were running the game in Micronesia up until that point.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so then the alliance would be Shane, Joe, Eva, Kyle, and everyone is still oblivious to Camilla, but Camilla's also in it?
Maybe? I don't know. And that's what I'm asking is, like, is that the grouping? Is it a different grouping? Like, and is it going to be Eva, Joe, who are then predominantly in that? Or is it this Kyle and Camilla taking over the game?
I mean, we could sit here and
speculate, but we can also wait 6 weeks and just find out.
Right, exactly. And then, so another, I think, just really perfect moment, and it is Jamie here, because we have David paranoid, and people aren't seeing what David is seeing, which some of it is correct, like you were saying earlier. So they're just seeing what David is talking about as paranoia. And that plays into Jamie from Guatemala, who constantly wants to talk strategy or checking in. It's still going to be Gary, going to be Gary, going to be Gary. Same as going to be Camilla, going to be Camilla. Are you looking over there? Are you sure that it's not, something else going on? So the paranoia and over checking outweighed the strategic benefit of keeping them in the alliance.
Yeah, I think this is our greatest comparison we could possibly make to this situation. I don't think it's 100% the same, because David wasn't paranoid he was going home ever. He was paranoid that, like, a move would eventually be made on them if they let this grouping go too far into the game.
Wasn't. He was like, we have other people to go after before they realize I'm the biggest threat.
That's which is basically a quote that Jamie says in this episode of Guatemala too.
Yeah.
So like, the comparables are there. And I do think ultimately, Carolyn mentioned this on the recap, that ultimately David ends up going here because he's kind of just unlikable on the island at this point, right? He's rubbing people the wrong way, plus he's paranoid. And that's very similar to what happens with Jamie in Guatemala. Like, Jamie is, a little hot-headed, where we're past the times where he's, like, barking at Bobby John, obviously. Yeah. But we're still at a point where he's paranoid, and he's continued asking. And in that episode of Guatemala, he comes up to Rafe at one point, and Rafe just goes to Lydia later. It's like, he's asked me 7 times today if we're sticking with the plan. Like, there's checking in, and then there's paranoia. Yeah. And Phil makes the argument that David's not paranoid because he's right, but like you can still be paranoid if you're right. Like that's still a thing. And I think what it came down to is David just wasn't, and I think this is again David's inexperience with the game in general, where I think he's doing well in the game, obviously, but not having seen like the 40 seasons preceding the new era, doesn't know how to handle this type of paranoia situation and how to push back when people aren't listening to you. And unfortunately for him, right, like Shaheen's apparently been planting the seeds for him to go for the last like 5 days.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that takes us to the end of this episode of 48 and rewinding it. We'll see you tomorrow on the Patreon. And John, what do we have over in the Specialist Universe?
Well, I mean, I've mentioned it a couple of times already, but if you haven't checked out the recap from Wednesday, what are you doing? Phil and Will had Carolyn from season 44 on there. It's a fantastic episode. It's a lot of fun. Carolyn's got such great insight into the game. Very interesting to hear her perspective on everything going on this season and all of her experience beating the cast and everything. Phil and Blake did Digging Deeper yesterday. And they, again, kind of dove into this idea of like, what's the correct move here? Was David right? Yes, that joke was made. I will point out that joke was made. There is a picture of David Wright that appears in that podcast. So make sure you check out the video for it. Then Phil is joined on Wednesday by Andy from season 47. That should be a very fun Predictions and Power Rankings. I am very certain of it. Sunday. Did I say Wednesday? I meant Sunday. On Sunday. And then McKenna and Kyle recapped The Amazing Race yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just back at it with the recap starting on Wednesday, and then McKenna and I next Friday doing the rewind once again.
All right.
Over on Patreon, there's us tomorrow. There's this is a fun time for anyone who's a fan of movies. $5 Tuesdays starting this Tuesday. We are doing the entire Mission Impossible series. So except for Mission Impossible 2, and like we'll get into that, don't worry. But there's a lot to check out there. Every Season Matters is moving on to Token Sheens, finishing up on moving on to Token Sheens. Phil's still talking about Survivor
Blood versus
Australian Survivor Blood versus Water, which got a lot spicier after what came out on the internet this week. So that'll be interesting to listen to. Obviously, there's casting perspective, the Q&A, everything always happening on the Patreon. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next time.
Goodbye, everyone.